Good morning. Jeff Miller, Disability Rights Texas, testifying against SB1 as it's written right now. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this morning and to share again our thoughts on this bill. I want to thank you for the changes that were made from the last time we looked at this. There were definitely some things done. Hopefully in response to some of the conversations we've had with some of your offices to make things better for voters with disabilities. Because voters with disabilities just want the right to vote like everybody else, like we've talked about before. But unfortunately, there is still language in this bill, there are provisions that we truly believe will end up disenfranchising voters with disabilities. The way it's written right now, this bill would limit the types of accommodations that voters with disabilities could receive. It seeks to limit the kinds of assistance that people with disabilities are entitled to under federal law. And it creates new paperwork and new oath barriers for people that want to assist voters with disabilities, at the same time increasingly or subjecting them to potentially increased penalties for mistakes. Now, we don't think any of this is intentional. We just think it's a wording issue that needs to be looked at. And so we ask to continue to have a dialogue with you all about what can be done to ensure that voters with disabilities have the same right to cast an independent and private ballot like everybody else. The last thing I'll say, just in the essence of time, because the details are in the written testimony that I provided, but just in the interest of time, I just needed to say, I wish I wasn't here saying this to you. I wish some of the voters that I know that have disabilities, that really this is their passion and they are truly concerned that this is going to end up impacting them in a very negative way. I wish they were able to be here, but unfortunately, because of the new variants and the virus, they're not. And there hasn't been an opportunity for them to present their testimonies to you all virtually or some other way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Miller. Senator Lucio, you're recognized for a question for Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, thank you for your testimony. One of the main concerns I have in the voting process is making sure that people with disabilities have a clear passage, so to speak, to be able to take part in the process. What can be done to this bill in terms of making sure that there's no hurdles, additional paperwork, etc., that would disenfranchise maybe people in Texas that with disabilities, and that's a very important issue for so many around the state, including many in my district.
Well, I think there's lots of things, and some of them are pretty technical, but just in general, a couple of things I would suggest is a provision that makes it clear that nothing in this bill precludes a qualified individual with a disability's right to get the assistance or the accommodations they're entitled to under the Voting Rights Act, HAVA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act. Just to make that specifically clear to everyone, I think would be really important. The other thing is looking at the fact that we are treating people that want to help people with disabilities vote, which is a right they have under federal law, we treat them as suspect in this bill. And I think that that's fundamentally why some of those provisions, we look at the supporter and ask them personal questions about the individual with a disability and other kinds of things, while at the same time disregarding the dignity and the worth of the individual with a disability. Some of those questions need to be targeted at the voter, asking if they're feeling intimidated. And yes, there's going to be bad actors that are still going to do bad things, but that's already against the law. Don't punish law-abiding voters with disabilities by creating new barriers that's going to make it harder for them to vote.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hughes, then Senator Zaffarini. Senator Hughes, you're recognized.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks again. And we do always thankful for the input as you thank you for acknowledging we're trying to make make the bill better and accommodate everybody. So thank you. It's so helpful to be in the process, and I want to make sure we're clear to make sure that anybody who's interested who wishes to submit written testimony to the committee, it can be emailed to scState.affairs. So SCSTATE.AFFAIRS at Senate.texas.gov. So we did that during the regular session and the last special. I want to make sure that's clear. Of course, we got your written testimony and we'll continue to talk, but anyone who wants to submit information to the committee, SCState.affairs at Senate.texas.gov. Every committee member will get that. It'll be part of this process. So I just want to make sure that's clear. And thank you for being here and for working with us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator, our Chairman. Senator Zaffarini, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, thank you for your service and for your leadership and for your excellent testimony and excellent written testimony to back it up. I agree with the general statement that you made in reference to Senator Lucio's question, but I would like to ask you some more specific questions, and I'll look at your written testimony first. Section 401 requires what you call the wet signature for the mail ballot application, and you offer a critique of that, but specifically, how would you change that? Do you have a suggestion for us?
I think that that's one of those things that would really depend on the needs, the support needs of the individual with a disability. What kind of disability do they have that precludes them from actually making a signature? And I agree with the Secretary of State's office. In many, many instances, the witness provision that's in the code would give them, an individual that isn't able to sign, an opportunity to fill out the application. However, the Help America Vote Act makes it specifically clear that voters with disabilities are entitled to cast an independent and private ballot. So if I have to have a disability but have to rely on someone else to sign for me, that's not an independent and private ballot. And like I said, in lots of cases, that would suffice. But allowing for the use of technology or other types of accommodations, at least entertaining the request, we think should be in the statute, and it should be clear that individuals have the right to make that request and have that ongoing dialogue with their county election officials to figure out how to make that work.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. You made another excellent point on page 2 of your written testimony regarding section 4.11, any known signature provision, and you make the point that this is particularly problematic for many voters with disabilities because their signature can change over time as a result of the nature of their disability. How would you change that provision in order to ensure that we do not in any way cause any unintended negative consequences for persons with disabilities?
Well, one of the central ways to help with that would be, number one, to keep the law as it is now, where we just look at the last 2 signatures, because those would be the most current and typically would be the most like whatever their signature is at the time that it's being compared. But also, the biggest thing that needs to happen is the cure provision that's been proposed needs to be part of the legislation that finally passes, so that if an individual's signature is called into question, they are notified before the election and have a chance to cure that before their ballot is not counted. The issue that needs to be considered, though, is for many voters with a disability, the reason that they're voting by mail is because their condition is such that going in public is not something they feel comfortable doing. So if I have to appear in person to cure my signature problem, that might not be something that I'm able to do because of my disability. So there needs to be another way. And once again, I'm not exactly sure what this language needs to be, but I think a dialogue needs to be had to figure out, is it something that we can do over the phone? Is it something that can be done electronically? I don't know, but there needs to be a way so that I don't have to make the choice between taking a chance that I'm going to make my condition worse and casting my vote.
Thank you. We'll be happy to pursue that with you. You also address Section 5.01, new curbside voting requirements, and you make a very excellent point that creating new requirements for persons providing assistance to voters with disabilities could have what you call a chilling effect on the number of people willing to assist voters with disabilities and Texas voters with disabilities, and specifically, you say, staff from state-supported living centers, assisted living facilities, or nursing homes may refuse to transport groups of residents to vote, and that additionally many people with disabilities rely on rideshare companies. How would you change Section 5.01 to ensure that it does not have this negative impact on persons with disabilities?
I think that having an additional requirement just because I take more than one person to the polls to curbside vote doesn't make a whole lot of sense anyway. But asking questions about the kinds of assistance that I'm giving them, I think is invasive. But also there's the provision also states that once I give you my name and address and my relationship to the voters that I've given transportation to, that information is transmitted to the Secretary of State's office, so it can then be looked at by the Attorney General's office. To us, that is one of the big issues here, is that I am going to be less likely to want to get involved and help other people vote if I know it might subject me to some kind of closer scrutiny, and for whatever reason, I don't want to play that game. Likewise, I know voters with disabilities that have told me that they will be less likely to ask some people to assist them at the polls if they think that their friend or the person trying to help them is more likely to end up being investigated for simple mistakes.
Thank you so much. You also address sections 5.03 and 5.04 requiring new requirements for individuals who assist voters, and you say that this could inadvertently violate the law and place the individual assisting at risk of investigation or prosecution. My same question, how would you change this to ensure that we avoid that negative consequence?
First of all, I would make it so that if I make a mistake in filling out the oath or the other forms, that it's not a state jail felony I'm looking at if it's a simple mistake and this is my first time doing that. And the passage, I mean, as it stands right now, that's exactly what would happen. I wouldn't be asking the person assisting the voter with a disability, the section there that says that I have to swear that that the voter has indicated to me that they're eligible for assistance. Well, if we have a question about whether or not someone is eligible for assistance, ask the voter that we have questions about. Don't ask somebody else. And it's filling out those extra forms and changing the way that we do the oath. Those things are the added barriers that are going to make it much less likely for voters with disabilities to find someone to assist them. So, I mean, simply put, the way to fix, in our minds, the way to fix it is to remove the new language that's being proposed, because we believe that that language will add additional barriers that will actually end up making it less available for people to find assistance when they need it to vote.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Zaffarini. Thank you, Mr. Miller, for joining us today. Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Miller, hold on a second. Senator Powell has a question for you. You recognize Senator Powell.
Mr. Miller, I am looking at your comments here and appreciate so much that you've gone to this extent to help to provide your input. I don't see anything on here that specifically addresses the poll watcher training manual that we've added, language that we've added. And I would ask you what kind of topics you believe should be put into that manual in order to prepare poll watchers to understand better.
Thank you very much for that question, Senator, because we do believe that that is a real issue, because we do think that because of the nature of the way that, first of all, people that have disabilities receive some kinds of assistance, that a lot of poll watchers aren't familiar with what that looks like. And it could look like intimidation or coercion or something like that. So one of the suggestions we have is that the manual needs to specifically talk about the types of assistance that individuals are entitled to under federal law and what those things look like. And common, simple things like cueing and asking questions and gesturing may be just the way that this person and the person that they're assisting, that's the way they work together. And I think the manual also needs to be very explicit about the kinds of accommodation requests and accommodations that need to be present at a polling site under federal and state law that voters with disabilities are entitled to. At least those two things we think need to be in the manual.
Thank you. Appreciate your response.